This is Beverly Whalen at the Art Barn, and we're going to go over our lesson number 2 for the Prepared to Paint series. The first lesson was on brushwork. All the brushes that we use, how to care for them, how to store them, and we also did our background with aerial perspective, atmosphere perspective, and aerial color loss and explanation for those. Now this lesson we're going to deal with values. Value is defined as the lightness or darkness of a hue. So we're going to just do a value scale first, so you understand the difference in values. From black to white, or from white to black, you can do a series of 9 different shades, and that's what we're going to do on our sheet. I will take a picture of it and list it underneath this video, if that's possible. And so I'm going to get out my black and white paint, put it on my palette, mix it with my palette knife, and I would like you to do this along with me. So you have black paint, white paint, a palette, and a knife. Then I would like you to start and stop the video as many times as necessary in order to understand the different values of black and white. Then we'll go on to color and how we can apply that to color, or hue. Hue is the determination of the color. So I'm going to put my phone on my value scale and begin mixing my paint, and I'll try to move the phone, adjust the phone to where it works for you and where you can see everything. Okay, there. Set that aside. Okay, I'm going to start with my palette. Make sure that's in the right spot. And I'm going to put a little bit of black paint on here. On one side, I have to do 9 different shades, and so I want to do it this way. Actually, I could set it right, since I have a clear plastic palette, I could set it right on top of my value scale. Give me a better idea of what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to put black over here. Black is right here. Okay, I want to put the black away. I might have to get at it again, so I'm just going to put it to the side. I'm going to use a different palette knife because we want to keep our colors pure as possible and clean. This is acrylic. Again, we could be doing this with oils, but I want to demonstrate this class in acrylics. It's set up for beginners. If you've never made a value scale before, this is the time to learn. Got some white paint on my palette, and can you see that all right? I think so. I'm going to put that to the side. And we're going to do a little bit of mixing. The first color that you mix, or the first value that you mix, is usually about an even dose, and I'm going to use a different palette knife for that, of black. I'm going to put it right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right here is in the middle. Okay. And I need a rag. There we go. Take an even amount of white, about, I'm guessing here, you can too. We'll see how that turns out. Now I'm going to mix that together, black and white. Some pigments are stronger than others. This is to looks like an even mix, and it looks like a pretty even equality here. Okay. Now, try to scrape that all into one value, one box. As best I can, wipe up the excess. Now I'm going to use some of that gray. Of course it becomes a gray, kind of a medium gray if you see that right there. Now I'm going to take some of that medium gray that's already in that box with my palette knife, and I'm going to add a little bit of black to it. Now let's go mid-ways here. It's pretty much like the medium color, so I'm going to add more black. You have to be able to come up with a color on both sides of this. Okay, it's a little bit darker. Now, let's see, medium gray. Now we're getting into a dark gray. Still we have our black over here. This one should be between this color and this color. So, I'm going to grab some of this paint with some of this paint, mix it together. It's a little bit darker than this, a little bit lighter than this. I'm going to clean my brush. Sorry, not brush, palette knife. And I'm going to work, well, so we already have a dark gray there. Let's add a little bit more black to this color, or this hue. Black is not a color, white's not a color either. But it's definitely what we consider a shade. So I'm going to add a little bit of black to that. And then finally on this should be the blackest black over here. A little bit more of this since I have an excess. A little bit more of this. Now this will be a good exercise for you to be able to tell the different values of black and white. Okay, it's a little darker. I think I want that a little bit darker, because this one has to be darker than this one. Okay, and this one is mostly black, maybe just a tint of gray in it as the number 9. Okay, now I'm going to wipe off my palette knife. You can stop the video, work on those before you go towards the lighter side, then start it up again. And you could watch me first and then work on yours. I'm going to take that gray, put it in the middle box, add a little bit of white to it to make a medium light gray. Has to be lighter. We have to have enough difference so we can put a shade between hand. So I'm going to add a little bit more white there. Okay, it's a nice light gray. Now, let's go further. Take some of this, go over here, add some more white. That should be a little bit lighter. And finally, take a little bit of that, put it in the first box, mostly add white, because it's closest to white you're going to come. If you were oil painting, I would use titanium white for this exercise, but you may want to include flake white when you're painting. It's a little bit more translucent. Titanium white is a little thicker, opaque. Now, we're going to mix this light gray with that middle gray for a little bit darker value between them. Might have to add a little black since some was on my palette knife already. Okay, now mix it up pretty good. Okay. Maybe a little on the dark side. I'm going to add a little bit more white. Where was that? There we go. Has to be between this color and this color. This will train your eye to be able to see the difference. The difference in values, the difference in what we're doing. Now to me, this one looks a lot like this one. So I think I'm going to have to add a little bit more white to this one. Catch it up. Okay, now that looks much better to me. A little bit more white. As I get towards the end, I'm not so concerned about keeping my white pure because that's all I'm using this for right now. Okay, that's a little bit lighter than this, and that's what I wanted. And I still have my medium gray, just a little bit higher. I'm going to wipe off my palette knife, put it in the water. Actually, I have 3 now, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe those clean. And we're going to transfer this to my chart so you can have a value scale as a visual aid. Okay, put that aside. Now, we're going to set the palette right above my value scale. Take a brush with some water, and we're going to place these where they belong. Use an edge brush. This is rather large, but it has a nice edge on it. Actually, that is a square brush, and I would rather have a nice edge brush. Just a minute. I thought I looked at that several times to make sure I had the right thing. Okay, we've got a edge brush here. Pretty long bristles. Now I'm going to start with my white because each time it will get darker. So I'm going to start with my white over here. See, even the white up against the paper is going to look a little bit different than the white on the paper. See, whites can be warm or they can be cool. In this case, I think both of them are pretty cool. Use most of that paint. Rinse my brush out with water. Make sure it's not too drippy, not too wet. Now I'm going to stick my paintbrush on the edge to my next value, which is the very lightest gray. And I'm going to fill my box in with my light gray. See how it's just slightly darker than that pure, cool white. Now, I'm going to add the next box, even without rinsing because most of the paint on my brush was gone. Now I'm going to take that next value of black and white, and I'm going to paint the next box. Might have to dip a little bit in water just to make it flow. Have it wet enough to spread. And see how I'm using my angle or my flat brush to keep a nice smooth line on the edges. That's why I like edge brushes. Try using it different ways as you apply your paint so you get a feel for the brushes and how the paint responds in the brush. Okay, now look at this brush closely. You see how the paint is on the end of the brush? It's not close to the ferrule. It's a long bristled brush, which helps, but that's one of the mistakes we make is we get paint inside the ferrule, then we can't get it out again and it ruins the brush. So I'm going to go to the next gray. It's a little bit darker. Wow, that one almost looks too dark, that one I just put down. We'll see how it dries. It's going to look different wet than it does dry. I can see how this gray is going to be a nice transition color. A little bit of water to make that spread. It's practice staying in the lines just so you can practice edges, that's all. Okay, we're going to go to the next one, which is close to our medium color. This one's just slightly darker. I think I might have to add a little bit of black to that. It's not too much. And get a little bit better hue. Okay. Nice. When the brush is just damp enough to be able to take that color from the palette onto your surface, it's such a nice feeling. And it takes practice to get it just right. How many times have I had a drippy painting? Now I'm going to go to the middle value, which is this one. I'm going to put that right in the middle on my chart. Now if you add more water to a color, you're going to get a more transparent color. If you add less water, more paint, you're going to get a more opaque color. Some pigments are different in oil paints, and there's going to be a difference in the hue as well. Now I'm going to go to the next darkest one. Looks very, very similar to what I just did. Might have to add a little bit of black. See, sometimes you see it and you think, oh, I'm fine, and then you go back and think, nope, I need to add. So I'm going to go a little bit darker. And the next box, a little bit darker. I find myself adding a little bit more water each time too. It just goes on so much smoother that way. I'm going to go to the next pigment. Even darker, but not completely black. You'll find that the masters hardly ever use just plain black in their paintings. They always had different pigments they mixed together to make something that looked similar to black, but they contained hue. And my last pigment besides the pure black is next, my dark gray, very dark gray. Almost looks black, doesn't it? The masters didn't use pure white either in their paintings. They often mixed white, especially for the lighter values in their hues. But I don't know of a master that actually used white all by itself. It's because white is not considered a color, it's a tint. Okay, and the very last one, which was the pure black, and I'm going to put that at the very end here. Now how that didn't get the end lines to it, but we know what belongs there. Okay, so this is what we would call a value scale. We have white, we have black, and we have everything in between. Now yours is probably going to look different than mine. I'm going to rinse my brush. Clean it. And we're going to do something fun here. Be able to demonstrate value, but not with black and white. Black and white's pretty straightforward. There's value in other colors, but before we get to the big colors, we're going to take an earth color, which we would get from the earth, which is brown. I got some black dirt out of my garden box. What we're going to do, I put it right here, and I mixed it with shavings of a black oil pastel. Now, you could also mix charcoal with that. In the early days, the father of modern art, named Giotto, did walls of plaster. While the plaster was wet, he would use an egg pigment based in water. So we're going to make some of that paint today, and that'll give you a demonstration of how you can make other colors too from natural things like chlorophyll from plants or beetroots. That's a natural red or a natural green, but this will be a natural brown. I already separated the egg white with the egg, and now I'm going to put this egg in with the dirt. I'm going to mix it with a palette knife. I put quite a bit of dirt in there. Wow. Now this is water-based, and that's what many of the masters used before they discovered oil paints and how they would last longer. When they would paint on these wet plaster walls, they could only paint until the plaster dried. Then they'd have to go to the next section. So oftentimes, like in Giotto's work, you would see several sections placed together on a wall. You could tell where he started and where he stopped on each section, because he could only do it while the plaster was wet. So we have egg right there. Now, rather than try to paint globs of dirt, of course you don't want it to be globby if you just want paint. You can use cheesecloth here. I didn't have cheesecloth, so I'm going to use a coffee filter. And I'm going to put a rag underneath just to protect my surface here. I'm going to place, I think I'm going to add some water here so we can get a little bit more out of it. And, that's what I was going to do too. I brought a special mixer I thought would be really mix it up well. We'll see if it doesn't cause a big problem here. Whoa! Yep, it splats. Splats everywhere. This is something I use to make my lattes with. Good thing I have my apron on. Okay. Boy, that one's pretty powerful. I think it mixed up pretty well, though. Now, let's try this. I think I'm going to set it in the empty bowl so it doesn't have any major problems. Because when I pour this into my coffee filter, hopefully will filter out any of the dirt particles that are not mixed in. It'll squeeze it. I could pour more, but we don't need a whole lot of paint in order to do our next project. It's not coming through. Okay. Apparently this is too fine. It's not as good as cheesecloth. Well, you live and let learn. So I'm going to put that over there. wipe my hands, and we're going to use this as the paint. And if I come into any clogs, what's the word for it? Clots of paint, then I will do them off to the side here. Okay, that'll work. Now, I have some examples of ancient art here. Oftentimes you would see ancient art on cave walls, old buildings, and many of them date way back before Christ was born. But in this case, this is an Egyptian, a copy of an Egyptian piece that was on a wall. And I'm going to take my flat brush, maybe a smaller brush too, and fill in. And I want you to when I do this, I want you to see the shapes. Well, that's not too bad. I don't see any large clumps, and it's staying within the lines. Yeah, not too bad. Get a smaller brush. Press it up against the bowl so it doesn't mess up. Okay, there you go. Much better. I want you to see the shapes within this figure, because if we look at figures or landscapes as shapes, it's it's easier to draw them, it's easier to paint them, to try to define those shapes. It's pretty simple because you know your shapes. Think of a triangle. Here we got a triangle right in here. Do you see that triangle? Oh, here's a triangle right there. Here is a curved line, but it's a rectangular curved line. Then we have a circle, kind of a square around that head is formed with a square. Did you see my brush strokes too? On his back, I went sideways. On his leg, I went downward. You have to think about those things when you're using your brush. Which way is the action moving? Which way would his muscles be going? It helps to define the characteristics of whatever you're painting. Now you can see the triangle very easily. You can see this triangle, just missing the tip here. And an object. I can picture most of this made from stone. There's a square, square. This is a square head rather than rounded, but you can see almost the square that's indented for the eye, and then a rounded cheek. And you have a long cylinders for the arms and the legs. Okay. Well, maybe you don't have paint, and maybe you want to learn how to paint. And it would be a fun thing to try to make your own paint. You can do this with just about anything. After using the coffee filter, though, I think I would get cheesecloth. And then you can strain it to make sure you don't have any lumps, like I did. And you can do experimenting with values. I will say this, I can use my value palette over here and show you something about using that darker value. And when you use values together, try to limit it to 2 or 3. You can shade with a darker value. Remember, black is called a shade, like behind the legs, if your light source was from the front. And with a lighter value, you would be able to tint. So maybe you want the sun to shine. You could use a lighter gray. Now, it's going to look different up against that dark. Suppose the sun was shining from the front, then you would definitely have the lighter gray in the front, maybe on the front of his arms there. It's kind of mixing in with the brown now. Let's put some shadow in there. Take that darker value of black, put it behind his arm where the sun's not shining, behind his head where the sun's not reaching there, and maybe on the side of the pot where the sun is not shining. Using a flat brush, you just want to shade part of that, not the entire thing. Now looking at that, oh, his tummy is probably dark too, huh? Because it's not getting the sunshine. Now when you look at that, you see the different values, keeping it in a very simple spectrum. Now, we're going to go on after we deal with color theory. We're going to show how the color can mix with the value. You can match value with color so to make our paintings even better. That's the lesson for today. Thank you for listening. The next time we do a lesson, it will be about color theory.